back to the shop, everybody. I wanted to show you what I do to maintain my Monarch lathe and some of the lubricants that I use. And just to give one other data point for you to make your own decision, people are irrationally passionate, in my opinion, about what oil to use, and there's a million things you can read online. A lot of them contradict each other directly, and you just have to make the decision on your own. But this is what I do for the lubricants on my Monarch lathe, and I am confident that it's going to outlast me. So let's look at some data from Monarch, and then we'll compare it to the modern stuff that I'm using now. This is the lubrication data from Monarch, printed from an email I got from the folks at Monarch. So if you have questions and you want to ask their opinion, they are still in business and extremely helpful, and can answer some of your questions. So up here we've got the different lubrication stations is how they describe this, and telling you where you need to pay attention to and what each function is. And then down below it shows what lubricants are recommended. So these recommendations are about 65 years out of date. So I think that's one thing that people don't consider or don't keep in mind when they're making this decision is, oh man, well the crossover is not exactly the same thing that it said in the book from 1955. Well, that's probably to be expected and a good thing. So we've come a long way in science, and certainly in the properties of lubrication and petroleum science have come a long way. So by and large, this machine uses Vactra heavy medium, which does and doesn't exist anymore. It's a little bit different the way Mobil has renamed things. Sun Oil Company, or Sunoco, number 80 whey oil for the apron reservoir. Back to more Vactra heavy medium, Mobilux grease number 2, and then Mobilux BRB lifetime. So the modern equivalents of these things have kind of consolidated. So for this machine, you really can get away with one oil and one grease. So Vactra heavy medium can be converted to Mobil DTE oil heavy medium and Mobil DTE 26. Those are both ISO 68 oils. DTE 26 has an anti-wear additive, so that should help with the gears maintaining all of their metal for longer. Basically, that wraps up all of these. The Sunoco number 80 is basically an ISO 68 oil, so you can use the same replacement you use for the Mobil Vactra oil, the heavy medium. And then Mobilux grease number 2, so that is an NLGI 2 grease. So most any high quality grease that even you're going to find at AutoZone or heck even Walmart is probably going to be perfectly sufficient for those things. Main drive motor bearings, which mine have been replaced to a fully sealed bearing, apron control rod support bearings. So those can be converted to that. And then the Mobil Grease BRB lifetime, so that grease is translated directly from Mobil, so I'm not just making this up on my own, to the Mobilith SHC 100. So you can use this in place of the lifetime BRB grease. The difference is this does not have a sodium thickener added to it like the BRB lifetime, and so you have to purge if you've still got some of the old grease in your system, in my case the clutch pulley bearing, and so you have to pump this through to get rid of all the old grease because they will not mix together and be happy. So all of the lubrication for my machine is done with the DTE 26 and the Mobilith SHC 100. So do with that what you will. I am perfectly happy risking my machine and it exploding because I'm not using the right thing. I know this is... Please forgive me for going handheld. I will try and be as steady as possible, but I know it's annoying. So this is the fill point for the gearbox, or the quick change gearbox. So in my lathe it is sealed up, so that's the way to get in there. And then behind my safety cutoff switch underneath here is the drain. So you can drain it into a bucket right over here and then fill it here. On the headstock, we have a recirculating oil indicator. I think that's what Monarch called it. But anyway, that's basically something that will drip while the lathe is on. It's just a mechanical pump that runs off the bull gear while the lathe is running. Down here on the apron, this is the fill point. You also have a little sight glass there to tell you how much oil is still in the apron. And then underneath here, there is there's a drain plug here, but also on the feed rod, there's another drain plug that you can get the oil out of the worm gear area. On my particular lathe, it's a little bit different than most, but I do have grease zerks on the back of my compound. Most of these lathes do not. Most of them are intended to be oiled, but the power compound has three grease zerks on it. And so that's a little bit different for from most machines. Another grease point here is right in front, and this basically greases the bearings that support the apron as it goes along the clutch engagement rod. So I don't do a whole lot there. I don't want this thing to be caked in grease because that means it'll be caked in chips. On the tailstock, we have a couple of points for the spindle. So those are meant to be filled as you use the spindle. On the back of the tailstock here, there is an oil reservoir that leaks down to the ways themselves. If you fill that up completely, it'll just all drain out within an hour or so. So I only fill that up when I'm like in the middle of working with it. And then this here, someone I believe has added this over time somewhere. That is a Bijur oil pump that feeds the oil lines in the cross slide ways to keep those nice and lubricated. So here on the back of the headstock, we have the fill port to actually fill the headstock with oil. And then there's also a fill level on the back. So you can see when the machine's not running how much oil you have in there. And then what we're really going to be focusing on today is this little plate here. We have a relief valve and an intake valve. And those two are where we're going to flush out and fill the bearing for the clutch with new grease. And I think it's probably going to be a pretty big mess, but it needs to be done. It'll make me feel better once it's done. Got a little cup here to try and catch the grease. Ooh, that is plugged. Looks like earwax. Let's try again. Okay, so here's what's going on. Pumping grease into that fitting, it's not getting through the plumbing to come back out through the relief valve. And the reason for that is someone has never bothered to clean it out. So I'm guessing there is just that earwax, disgusting grease jammed all through the plumbing. So if you can look in the corner of the frame there, or well, not the corner, but anyway, if you look up here, you can see some of my red grease that I've just pumped in. And it has gone through the bearing and then slung out under centrifugal force while the motor was running. And so it's going to continue doing that and continue losing grease because it has nowhere else to go. So there's just too much, basically too much grease in there. So the way to fix this, I think, is going to be kind of a crude method. I could disassemble this entire thing, take the clutch off, take all the housings off, remove the bearing, all that stuff. That does not sound like a lot of fun to me, although it would give a lot of clearance to clean properly, which would be great. But if we have to do that, we will. For the time being, I think I'm going to follow instructions from Dan. He's one of the viewers of the channel, and we've been emailing a bit, and he helped me out with what he did. He did because he has basically the same lathe as I do, and that was to basically try and flush the bearing and the plumbing out using brake cleaner. So that's what we're going to try to do. I will get set up. We've got a Sure Shot sprayer and a jug of acetone, or not acetone, a jug of brake clean. And so let's try that. Hopefully we can flush it out and not make too huge of a mess. Dan said that that worked for him, and he's probably run his lathe, he said, about 200 hours since that operation, and it's worked great, and no more grease slinging out. So let's see what happens. I bought this Sure Shot, I don't know, it's been a couple of years ago, and the idea was to use it for brake clean. Obviously, I put a little sticker on there. It hasn't performed that well, to be honest with you, and I don't know if it's because I've misused it or because it's factory defective or my expectations are too high. I don't really know. I don't think I'm asking too much. All I want it to do is spray, and it seems like no matter how much you mess with it, it doesn't spray. It turns into having a little bit of a dribble. And anyway, it's just beyond time to try and do something about it. I didn't want to buy another one. These things are actually quite expensive. This one is the, man, I can't remember. I guess the enamel one is more expensive or something like that. I can't remember. But anyway, so I spent some money to go ahead and rebuild it. So you can buy a kit. I actually bought this just at my hardware store here in Phoenix. I know not everybody's got an industrial hardware store, but I'm lucky enough to have one pretty close by. I drive past it all the time to go to work. So this kind of has all of the internal parts for this thing, and a new nozzle and washers and all kinds of good stuff. So Model A sprayer. Top load with light liquids, pressurized with air chuck, and spray anywhere. That's all I want. So obviously we've got some corrosion, just to be expected. It has been used. And there's our new part. It's a soft material, some kind of rubber, I'm assuming. So now what we're going to do is fill this guy up with brake clean. Not all the way up, but put some brake clean in it and then fill it up with compressed air and start flushing. So here's what I've rigged up. It's a little air sprayer, nice soft rubber tip. Might be ruined by the time we're done with it, but that's okay. And then I put that needle fitting on the front of the Sure Shot, and then another little fitting in the pipe fitting just to give me a little bit more standoff. And so what this is gonna do is shoot through the pipe and flush out, wash the bearing really well, and then hopefully, as that gets cleaned out, we can get air or brake clean moving through there. I've got a little shelf here with some pig mat on it to soak up the brake clean that's flowing through there so it doesn't get all over the motor. Well, my trick didn't work. Unfortunately, the bearing is so packed full of old earwax grease that we've got to take more extreme measures. So I've got the parts diagram ready to go. And now we are going to have to suck it up and take this guy apart. I'm actually okay with this because it gives me a chance to inspect everything, and I was getting that little baby rattle, so I'll have a chance to see what that's all about, hopefully. And there's enough guidance online, and the parts diagram is pretty detailed, so I hope this won't be a disaster.